Saturday morning cartoons meant everything to American kids in the 1970s, but what you watched depended on where you lived and who you were. White families in suburban neighborhoods gathered around their color television sets to watch Scooby-Doo, The Jetsons, and Saturday morning specials that reflected their world. Black families often had different viewing habits, seeking out shows that included faces that looked like theirs. The ritual was the same across racial lines, though: waking up early, pouring a bowl of sugary cereal, and claiming your spot on the living room carpet. Soul Train changed everything for Black television viewers when Don Cornelius brought it to national syndication in 1971. Every Saturday afternoon, Black households across America tuned in to see their music, their dances, and their style celebrated on national television. The dancers weren't professional performers. They were regular people from Chicago and later Los Angeles who could move like nothing you'd ever seen. When the Soul Train line formed and couples danced down that iconic aisle, kids at home would try to copy those moves in their own living rooms. Mothers would watch their children attempt the latest steps, remembering their own youth while feeling pride that finally someone understood their rhythm. The Flip Wilson Show broke barriers that most white viewers didn't even realize existed. Wilson's Thursday night variety show ran from 1970 to 1974, and for many white Americans, it was their first real exposure to Black comedy and entertainment on prime time. His character Geraldine, with her catchphrase, "The devil made me do it," became a cultural phenomenon that crossed racial lines. Black viewers appreciated seeing someone who looked like them commanding a primetime stage with confidence and humor. Children would repeat Geraldine's phrases at school, finally having catchphrases that came from someone who understood their world. All in the Family forced American families to confront their own prejudices every Tuesday night starting in 1971. Archie Bunker's bigoted rants made white liberal families uncomfortable while making conservative viewers squirm for different reasons. The show tackled racism, homosexuality, rape, and other topics that television had never dared address before. Black families watched to see how their struggles would be portrayed, often finding themselves torn between appreciation for the honesty and frustration with the stereotypes. Parents would pause the television to explain to their children why Archie's words were wrong, turning entertainment into painful education. Good Times premiered in 1974 and gave Black families something they'd never had before: a show entirely about them. The Evans family lived in a Chicago housing project, dealing with poverty, unemployment, and the daily struggles of Black urban life. When James Evans got laid off or when the family couldn't pay rent, Black viewers saw their own experiences reflected on screen. Mothers wiped away tears watching Florida Evans stretch $1 to feed her family, recognizing the same worry lines around their own eyes. The show's portrayal of strong family bonds despite economic hardship gave viewers hope that dignity could survive even the worst circumstances. The Jeffersons spun off from All in the Family in 1975, showing a Black family who had moved on up to Manhattan's Upper East Side. George Jefferson was successful, proud, and sometimes prejudiced himself, a complex character that challenged both Black and white stereotypes. The show's theme song became an anthem in Black households, with families singing along to "We're Finally Moving On Up." Children would dance around their living rooms, believing that someday they too might escape the limitations that surrounded them. Parents watched with bittersweet smiles, knowing that success often meant leaving their community behind. American Bandstand remained primarily white, even as music integrated during the 1960s and 1970s. Dick Clark's afternoon dance show featured Black artists performing their hits, but the dancing audience stayed overwhelmingly white for years. Black teenagers in Philadelphia, where the show was filmed, knew they weren't welcome in those crowds. The contrast with Soul Train couldn't have been starker. 2 dance shows, 2 different Americas. Young Black viewers learned early that their music could be celebrated while they themselves remained invisible. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson became appointment television for both black and white families, but for different reasons. Carson rarely featured black comedians or musicians as guests in the early years, making their appearances feel like breakthrough moments. When Red Fox or Flip Wilson appeared on Carson's couch, black viewers knew they were witnessing something significant. Families would gather around the television, holding their breath as their representatives faced America's most influential talk show hosts. Children would stay up past their bedtime, understanding somehow that they were watching history unfold. Roots changed American television forever when it aired over 8 consecutive nights in January 1977. White families who had never seriously considered the realities of slavery found themselves emotionally invested in Kunta Kinte's story. Black families watched with tears, pride, and anger as their history was finally told with dignity and power. Grandparents would pull their grandchildren close during the most difficult scenes, whispering stories about their own ancestors that had never been spoken aloud before. For 8 nights, America shared the same trauma, the same tears, the same impossible questions about how such cruelty had been allowed to continue for centuries. Local news programs reflected the deep divisions in American society during the Civil Rights era. Black families relied on news anchors who covered police brutality, housing discrimination, and civil rights protests with appropriate gravity. White suburban families often watched different stations where these same stories received less attention or different framing. The evening news became a mirror showing how differently the same events could be perceived. Children learned to read between the lines, understanding that their reality wasn't always considered newsworthy by everyone. Saturday Night Live premiered in 1975 with an all-white cast that reflected television's continued segregation. The show's early years featured almost no black performers or perspectives, despite drawing heavily from black musical and comedic traditions. Black viewers noticed the absence, especially when white cast members performed in blackface or made jokes about racial topics without any black voices in the room. The laughter felt hollow when it came at their expense, reminding families that progress moves slowly and unevenly. Sanford and Son brought Red Fox's nightclub comedy to prime time, starting in 1972. The show about a black junk dealer and his son dealt with poverty and family dynamics in ways that felt authentic to black viewers. Fox's character Fred Sanford was cantankerous and proud, struggling to make ends meet while maintaining his dignity. Fathers saw themselves in Fred's stubborn independence, while sons recognized the tension between wanting to escape and feeling obligated to stay. The show's humor came from pain that many families knew intimately. The Price is Right became daytime television for families across all racial lines, but the contestants revealed television's demographics. Bob Barker's game show featured overwhelmingly white, middle-class contestants who could afford to travel to Los Angeles for tapings. Black viewers played along at home, shouting prices at the television, but rarely saw themselves represented among the contestants spinning the big wheel. Children would dream of winning a new car while knowing somehow that such prizes weren't meant for families like theirs. Julia premiered in 1968 as television's first series starring a black woman in a non-domestic role. Diane Carroll played a widowed nurse raising her son alone, a groundbreaking character that sparked controversy in both black and white communities. Some black critics argued the show was too sanitized, avoiding the harsh realities of black life in America. Mothers watched Julia's perfect apartment and professional success with mixed feelings, proud of the representation, while wondering if their own struggles would ever be acknowledged on screen. The Carol Burnett Show drew family audiences together every Saturday night from 1967 to 1978. Carol Burnett's variety show featured comedy sketches that were silly and safe, appealing to white middle-class sensibilities. Black viewers enjoyed the physical comedy and musical guests, but the humor rarely reflected their cultural experiences. Families would gather for these shows anyway, grateful for anything that brought them together for an hour without confronting the weight of their daily struggles. The Ed Sullivan Show remained influential throughout the 1960s by showcasing black musical acts for white audiences. When Diana Ross and the Supremes appeared, or when James Brown performed, black viewers felt pride seeing their culture reach mainstream television. Sullivan's stage became a bridge between black artistry and white acceptance, though the host himself often seemed uncomfortable with the cultural significance of what he was presenting. Children would practice singing along, imagining themselves on that same stage, reaching that same audience. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids premiered as a Saturday morning cartoon in 1972, giving black children animated characters who looked like them. Bill Cosby's educational cartoon featured kids from North Philadelphia dealing with real-world problems while learning valuable lessons. The show's messages about education, friendship, and making good choices resonated with black families who rarely saw positive representations of black childhood on television. Parents encouraged their children to watch, hoping these cartoon role models might inspire better choices than the limited options they saw in their own neighborhoods. The Lawrence Welk Show appealed primarily to older white audiences with its polka music and wholesome entertainment. Black families occasionally watched, often with amusement at the show's earnest square dancing and accordion solos. The program represented a kind of America that felt foreign to many black viewers, a nostalgic vision of the past that had never included them in the first place. Grandparents would shake their heads at the unfamiliar music, wondering how this qualified as entertainment while their own rich musical traditions remained invisible. Chico and the Man addressed racial tensions through the relationship between a young Chicano man and an older white garage owner. The show ran from 1974 to 1978 and attempted to deal with prejudice through comedy. Black viewers could relate to the themes of generational conflict and racial misunderstanding, even though they weren't directly represented in the storylines. The show offered hope that different communities might eventually find common ground, though that future still seemed impossibly distant. Hawaii Five-0 ran from 1968 to 1980 and featured one of television's few racially diverse casts in a police procedural. Jack Lord's Steve McGarrett worked alongside Hawaiian and Asian American officers, presenting a vision of racial cooperation that was rare on television. The show's exotic location and integrated cast appealed to viewers who wanted to see what a less segregated America might look like. Children would imagine living in a place where skin color didn't determine your opportunities, where competence mattered more than race. The Waltons premiered in 1972 and portrayed a white rural family during the Great Depression with warmth and authenticity. Black families could appreciate the show's themes of family loyalty and economic hardship, even though the Walton family's experiences were specifically white and rural. The show's portrayal of poverty was gentler and more nostalgic than the harsh urban realities most black families knew. Mothers would watch Olivia Walton's strength and recognize their own resilience, even as they wondered why their own struggles never seemed so honorable on screen. Marcus Welby, MD, ran from 1969 to 1976 and featured Robert Young as a compassionate doctor treating patients of all backgrounds. The medical drama occasionally dealt with racial themes when black patients visited Welby's office. These episodes felt groundbreaking to viewers who rarely saw interracial professional relationships portrayed positively on television. Families would discuss these episodes afterward, imagining what it might feel like to be treated with such respect and dignity by white professionals. Happy Days premiered in 1974 and created a nostalgic vision of 1950s America that was almost entirely white. The show's portrayal of teenage life in Milwaukee felt foreign to black viewers who knew that the real 1950s had been a time of rigid segregation and limited opportunities. The Fonzie character became a cultural icon, but his rebellious coolness drew heavily from Black cultural traditions without acknowledging those roots. Young Black viewers enjoyed the show's innocence while understanding they could never be part of the world it celebrated. The $6 Million Man ran from 1973 to 1978 and represented the ultimate white male power fantasy. Steve Austin's bionic abilities made him superhuman, reflecting American confidence during a difficult decade. Black viewers enjoyed the science fiction elements and action sequences, but the show's vision of heroism remained firmly rooted in white masculine ideals. Children would pretend to have bionic powers while knowing that real power in America still depended largely on the color of your skin. The Mary Tyler Moore Show ran from 1970 to 1977 and portrayed an independent single woman working in a Minneapolis newsroom. The show's feminist themes appealed to women across racial lines, but Mary Richards' experiences as a white career woman felt distant from the realities facing most Black women. The workplace comedy showed a professional world where Black faces were notably absent. Black women watched Mary's independence with longing, knowing they faced obstacles that never appeared in her storylines. In the Ghetto by Elvis Presley played on radio stations across America in 1969, but its message hit differently depending on who was listening. White suburbanites heard it as social commentary, a tragic story about faraway problems. Black families living in urban areas heard their daily reality set to a melody, their struggles transformed into entertainment for others. Children learned early that their pain could become someone else's art without bringing them any relief. The variety shows of the era featured Black performers as guests rather than hosts, reinforcing hierarchies that viewers absorbed unconsciously. When Sammy Davis Jr. appeared on Dean Martin's show, or when Aretha Franklin performed on The Tonight Show, Black viewers felt pride mixed with frustration. They celebrated seeing their stars reach mainstream audiences while understanding that those same stars would never be given their own primetime platforms. The message was clear. Black talent was welcome as long as it knew its place. Commercial breaks revealed which families were considered valuable consumers and which weren't. Advertisements for suburban homes, family cars, and household products featured exclusively white families living comfortable middle-class lives. Black children learned to imagine themselves in these commercials, substituting their faces for the ones they saw on screen. The absence spoke volumes about who was expected to buy these products and who was considered irrelevant to the American economy. Radio stations divided along racial lines more clearly than television ever did. AM radio featured pop and rock stations that played primarily white artists, while Black families tuned into soul and R&B stations that understood their musical tastes. Children would move the radio dial between stations, sampling both worlds but knowing which one truly spoke their language. The DJ voices were different too. Black radio personalities brought energy and community connection that mainstream stations couldn't match. Magazine stands in grocery stores told their own story about American priorities. Time, Newsweek, and Life featured white politicians and celebrities on their covers week after week. Jet and Ebony magazines occupied smaller spaces on the racks, serving Black readers who wanted to see their own community's achievements and struggles acknowledged. Families would flip through mainstream magazines looking for any mention of Black success, often finding nothing but disappointment. Sunday morning television divided along religious and cultural lines that reflected deeper social boundaries. White families watched mainstream Protestant services or shows like Davy and Goliath that reinforced their values. Black families often tuned into gospel programs, featuring powerful preaching and music that lifted their spirits after difficult weeks. The contrast in worship styles reminded viewers that even their relationships with God were shaped by racial experience. Game shows like Password and Match Game featured celebrity panels that were overwhelmingly white, sending subtle messages about who qualified as American entertainment royalty. Black viewers would play along at home, often outsmarting the celebrity contestants while knowing they would never be invited to sit in those chairs. The shows promoted a vision of American wit and charm that somehow never included Black perspectives. Children's educational programming reflected assumptions about which children deserved enrichment and which didn't. Shows like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood occasionally featured Black children, but the gentle suburban world Fred Rogers inhabited felt foreign to kids growing up in urban environments. The lessons about feelings and friendship were universal, but the setting assumed a safety and stability that many Black families couldn't take for granted. Late-night television became a refuge for alternative voices that couldn't find platforms during prime time. Midnight Special and Don Kirshner's rock concert featured Black musicians performing for audiences who stayed up late to see them. Parents would let their teenagers watch these shows, understanding that their children needed to see performers who looked like them, even if it meant staying up past reasonable bedtimes. Weather reports on local news reminded viewers daily of their geographic and economic limitations. Meteorologists would warn about storms approaching suburban areas while barely mentioning the urban neighborhoods where many Black families lived. The maps showed temperature differences between wealthy and poor areas, but rarely acknowledged that some communities had fewer resources to deal with extreme weather conditions. Which television show from this era shaped your family's viewing habits the most? Every program told us something about who belonged in American society and who didn't.